And type 1 diabetes, which is the mechanism that goes beyond it, becomes an autoimmune disease, as I will explain. Insulin-producing cells are destroyed. This condition, too, will benefit by increased water intake. The need for insulin will decrease drastically, and we prevent the secondary damage of dehydration, such as vascular damage and retinopathies and things like that. So these things will disappear. They will not occur because they are secondary damage produced by dehydration. Autoimmune diseases are insulin-dependent diabetes, just I explained, neurological disorders such as multiple sclerosis, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, lupus, muscular dystrophy, chronic fatigue, Hashimoto's disease, a whole lot of other conditions are produced as a result of a cycle that begins to establish in an area. The damage of dehydration occurs when cortisone begins to secrete a lot of interleukin-1 and depresses interleukin-2 production, which are two elements that the white cells produce in circulation in order to regulate their subordinate actions. Interleukin-2 stimulates immune system and interferon production, which are the defense mechanisms against bacteria and cancer and a whole lot of other things. In dehydration, to the point that we have to rely on cortisone activity, this element becomes destroyed or suppressed. Interleukin-1 is responsible for mobilization of elements from the body tissues themselves. This is a slide that I need to explain to you. Vasopressin, that I showed you earlier, is a cortisone release factor. It's a very strong cortisone release factor. It's a modulating cortisone release factor. When dehydration occurs in the body and vasopressin becomes more and more active, vasopressin produces cortisone release factor, and cortisone release factor stimulates interleukin-1 production. And this becomes a vicious circle. More and more occurs. At a certain level, a substance called interleukin-6 and another one, tumor necrosis factor, are secreted. These are the elements that take cells out of the system, they break them down, they fragment the interior of the cells, and the nucleus is broken down into segments that are refloated into the system and picked up by other tissues as primary raw materials that have already been manufactured in one or another capacity. It's like when a car is broken down, you take the carburetor of one car and put it in another car. These elements that are broken from the DNA are being used in other capacities. Now, interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor stimulate proteases in the body, and this is a part of the remanufacturing process. But if it gets stuck on the job with dehydration, it continues to the point of producing DNA damage and RNA damage and fragmenting more and more cells. At a certain level of fragmentation, the segments of the DNA that are produced or RNA that are produced have unfortunately been labeled as viruses, slow viruses, such as HIV, such as Coxsackie virus in chronic fatigue. In AIDS, when they cultured the cells that are producing AIDS, they gave the cells interleukin-6 extensively and harvested the virus. So they were fragmenting the DNA. That's what interleukin-6 does. It does it actually in insulin, breaking down the beta cells. Interleukin-6 breaks down the beta cells and produces the type 1 diabetes. Now, in HIV commercialization, they don't say that they produce the virus with interleukin-6. But in the culture medium, when they gave these cells one of the essential amino acids that I showed you that become deficient, they gave these culture cells cysteine. These cells didn't produce any more virus. So HIV virus is produced when the cell is deficient of an element, such as cysteine and zinc. Now, they have converted this half science into a money-making and people-killing process we call AIDS research. We take this exactly the same problem to Africa, and we say a whole continent of Africa suffers from AIDS, not realizing that drought in Africa, food shortage in Africa, is the primary cause of the problem, because AIDS is a metabolic disorder. It's not a viral disease. I've said that a long time ago. I've said it in scientific language. I've explained this process in scientific language. And the section is in my book, Your Body's Many Cries for Water. It is on my website, watercure.com, so that the world will know AIDS is a fraud.